Good afternoon and welcome along to this Salamandersoft webinar, the fourth in our series about the change of the academic year. This afternoon we're going to be looking at the effect on timetable calendars. So if you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free to post them via the chat box. We'll try and respond to some of these during the webinar, but myself or my colleague Kieran, our Assistant Support Coordinator, will attempt to respond to them as well. A summary of these will be published on our website along with the recording, which we hope to make available shortly after the webinar as well. We'll be making a start shortly. So, good afternoon. My name is Stuart Wilkie. I'm the support coordinator here at Salamandersoft. Also joining me will be my colleague Kieran, the assistant support coordinator. So today we're going to be looking at the timetable calendars and the effect of the academic year change. So, starting off with an overview, generically our calendar processes cover three main areas when we're looking at timetables, those being the pupil timetable, the staff timetable, and optionally room timetables. We also support staff diary as well, where the MIS supports this. The way this process works is we retrieve what is known as the current timetable as published by the MIS for each of these areas, and then we'll apply it to the user's mailboxes. We work out the user's mailboxes by verifying the ID of the person, and then comparing that to the user's in-Active Directory, the way that we match them with our normal users processes, take the email address, and then send the data along to the appropriate service. So what challenges do we have when related to the academic year change? The main one is whether we need to prevent users seeing the new timetable in advance or not. Other impacts can be work that you might be completing over the summer or may have completed recently, changing the location of the user's mailboxes. Also, at the start of the new term, there are often lots of group changes, which means that calendars may become out of date quite quickly. There's also the number of weeks in advance that we sync to consider. So, looking at our timetable process specifically, the good news is, for the past 2 years, only timetables for the current academic year are extracted. This means that September's timetables, being in the new academic year, will not be processed for any users by default. This can be overridden often for staff if you choose to allow this, but the default behavior is only the current academic year. The users obviously must have a mailbox. Now, this is relevant if your email addresses, your mailboxes for users are hosted in the cloud, for example, so in M365 or in Google Workspace. When the users are first created in Active Directory, we need the users to then sync to your appropriate service. And these are done by the Cloud Sync tools appropriate, whether those be Azure AD Connect or Google Cloud Directory Sync. Common issues that we experience when related to timetables are the users haven't synced their respective cloud platform. When we first run our processes, they're created in Active Directory. And then not long after that, our process will then try and find the user in the cloud service to add various options to them, calendars being one of them. If this is the case, then often it's the second day before the calendars are added, or you can optionally run our process again. Some sites will have a second run of the user's process to make sure that users have their mailboxes provisioned. You might have users not being created. For example, there are log messages shown. We might be excluding users, or there may be a problem with the intake year or the year group, meaning that we can't create them. The third issue is that the timetable might not have been allocated or published fully at this point, so therefore there's no timetable to extract. This is particularly relevant when looking at SIMS. In the case of the timetable needs to be pushed and published from Nova, or in the case of ISAMs, where the timetable needs to have been allocated to weeks. So what are your options? We can optionally allow processing of the next academic year, as I mentioned. Are you changing where your mailboxes are or how they're processed? So have you recently decided to move your mailboxes from on-premise Exchange to Office 365, M365? Have you made a change to start using Google, where you were previously using either on-prem Exchange or M365? Please discuss these with the team in advance by sending an email to support@salamandersoft.co.uk, and our team can look to see if we can make the relevant changes in advance of the new term. You can also use our Salamander status for your application to view your log files, which will give you an early indication of you having any potential issues. So in terms of preparing for the new year, check your Cloud Sync tool. Make sure that your Cloud Sync tool is syncing the users as you'd expect and that it is up to date using the latest version. We also recommend discussing with your timetabler to find out how they're configuring the new academic year. Make them aware of the need to publish in advance if we're going to publish timetables for the users, and make sure that weeks are allocated appropriately. Like I said, the allocation is particularly important when you're dealing with ISAMs. Make sure that timetable is published. That relates particularly to SIMS, although you might see similar wording relating to other MISs also. If in doubt, your MIS support team will be able to advise of any requirements for the timetable to be visible. So, our status viewer allows you to view various options within the configuration of your application and make changes relating to the calendar sync. It's a light touch application, as I said, for viewing and controlling some elements of the integration suite. Relating to calendars particularly, you can choose to enable or disable the process entirely for pupils or staff, just for calendars. You can also choose to allow the processing of the next academic year early. You can lastly change the number of weeks to sync in advance. The default is 6, but there are a number of other options available to you. A note of caution here though, the more number of weeks in advance you choose to sync, the slower the process will be on its initial runs, as it has more data to 1, retrieve from the MIS, and 2, then process to the user's mailboxes. You can also view the log files to verify the processes applying timetables to users. Overall, you can then disable and enable full processes, whether it be the entire calendar sync or other processes within the application, for example, users, classrooms, etc. The status of your application screen for calendars can be found on the Tools page. You can see there's a section for calendars at the bottom with the status shown for an option to either disable or enable. The processing range is available from a drop-down box and an enable or disable option for processing next year's events. The text on the button describes the action that clicking that button will make. So, a recap. We talked about how our calendar process works and the way that our data is extracted and then processed through the users. We talked about common situations that occur and what options you have, highlighting the need to make sure what your timetabling process is on site. We talked about preparing the next academic year and your options around showing the new timetable early if you choose to do so, but noting that this is not the default option. I also showed you the status viewer and how you can choose to configure what options in your timetable are processing at what time. Finally, if there are any questions, I'll go have a quick look in the chat box in a moment to see if there are any there that I can answer. We'll also publish a summary of these at a later point, and I've left on screen 2 hyperlinks which are useful to direct you to any further FAQs on our website describing further options that we've discussed today. So the first question we've had is, we have extra categories in our staff calendars that we'd like to remove. I'm assuming by this we mean there's extra subjects perhaps that we're looking to remove. Yes, we can remove particular subjects from the timetable of users. For example, if there are break times that are timetable as events, we can remove those. If we're relating to staff diary, if the categories of the events are shown in the staff diary, then optionally we can also remove these too. Unless there are any further questions, I'd like to thank you for attending this webinar this afternoon. The recording, as I mentioned, will be made available at a later point. If you have any queries about any of your configuration with Salamander, please feel free to drop us a support case at support@salamandersoft.co.uk, and our team will endeavour to be in touch with you as soon as we can. Thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon.